Hi, welcome to 14-day weather forecast. We do have some potentially nasty weather on the way in the short term. Now, with that said, the details are somewhat uncertain. But let's have a look. Now, here's a picture at 18 GMT on Tuesday, the 21st of October. It's a showery setup. We have areas of low pressure close to the UK. Now, as I run the sequence, what happens is a nasty looking area of low pressure pushes in from the southwest. It deepens and tracks eastwards or northeastwards across maybe the south of England. But this is where the uncertainty is actually still quite high despite the short lead time. The reason is that slight differences in the track and development of this area of low pressure will make a big difference to the weather which we experience. But what this particular computer model run shows is very wet and very windy conditions affecting parts of the south, central and eastern counties of England through this time frame. I'll come back to this in more detail a little bit later on, but running the sequence through to its conclusion, that area of low pressure gradually moves away and then colder air moves down from the north. Showers turn wintry over high ground in Scotland. And then towards the end of the week, it's a mixed picture. High pressure perhaps having more influence again in the south and an Atlantic flow in central and northern areas. And with the northerly flow being cut off, temperatures are starting to recover at this point. We're going back into a westerly based regime. Here's the jet stream and upper air temperature sequence for UK inside the red circle. So the blues indicate cold air, the greens close to average, the yellows and oranges mild air, and the mottled shaded area as the track of the jet. And as I run this, what we see is that colder air makes its way southwards for a time, but then it's back to a fairly average picture with the jet stream pushing across the UK. But as I've mentioned, perhaps far enough north for high pressure to be influencing things at times, particularly in the south. Let's see some of the day-to-day forecast charts. This is Wednesday, and it's not bad at all for most of the UK for most of the day. But then through the afternoon and evening, outbreaks of heavy rain begin to push up into the south. Temperatures fairly close to the average. 8, 9, 10 in the south, in the north, so Scotland and Northern Ireland, a few degrees higher in southern and central parts of Britain. Then Thursday, this is when all the fun and games may be occurring. The charts here show that heavy rain moving eastwards and northeastwards away from the UK, but there is a potential at least for some disruption. I'll look at the winds a little bit later. Colder as well by now. 10 or 11 in the south, several degrees lower in the north. So heavy rain possible on Thursday in much of England and Wales. Then by Friday, the rain associated with that area of low pressure is further north, but it's sinking southwards through the day once more, mainly across eastern counties. And temperatures, well, it's a chilly day, double figures in the south perhaps, but fairly cold. And then into the weekend, temperatures maybe dipped a little bit further. The pink shading there over Scotland is indicating that showers will be turning wintry, so over higher ground there could well be some accumulating snow, especially areas like the Cairngorms, of course. As I've said, it's a chilly day, but quite a lot of sunshine around in most of the UK, showers becoming more scattered. Sunday and Monday, using data from the GFS model, distinctly chilly still on Sunday. Temperatures starting to recover on Monday as the northerly flow is cut off and more of a westerly based one returns. Lots of dry weather around on Sunday. Also on Monday, maybe more cloud and some rain starting to feed into the northwest. I think as well there is a risk of patchy frost on some nights. Patchy because we're going to have fairly strong winds, variable amounts of cloud, so even as that colder air mass moves southwards, it's not a given that frost will develop widely. I've just brought up a couple of illustrative charts here. This one on the left is for Saturday using data from the UKV model. Temperatures there, northern Britain, Northern Ireland perhaps, low enough for a touch of frost. The chart on the right there is from the Canadian model. It's for Tuesday morning, and if it's correct, the frost risk could be spreading down across much of the UK, at least for a time, as that area of high pressure becomes more influential. But I don't think frost is going to be a big issue through the coming days. But strong winds may well be. With that said, there is a lot of uncertainty still. Now, the chart on the left is from the European model, the one on the right is from the GFS. They're both for midday on Thursday, and there are big differences there, at least as far as we're concerned. If you looked at this on the global scale, the differences would probably be very small indeed, but when we're zooming into the UK, it highlights the impact which very, very small changes in the track and development of areas of low pressure can have on the weather which we experience. So the GFS on the right is showing wind gusts of over 60 miles an hour in East Anglia in the southeastern corner, whilst the European model is going for gusts of between 30 to 45 miles an hour, with the strongest winds further east over the English Channel and into the North Sea. And it's not just a question of timing here, because I've looked through the ECM model and at no point does it bring in gusts as strong as the GFS. So the message, as ever, is stay up to date with the short range forecasts. Keep an eye on the weather warnings issued by the UK Met Office. And this animation is using data from the UK Met Office UKV model. It's showing wind gusts through the Wednesday night through to Sunday morning period. And initially, the strongest winds are in southern and central parts of the UK, as I've mentioned. You can see there in East Anglia and the southeast for a time, gusts of over 50 to 60 miles an hour, I think. And then the strongest gusts are becoming focused on northeastern Britain. And there is an area of very strong winds for a time, just very close to East Anglia, the eastern coastal counties in southern and central parts of England. So, possibility of disruption from heavy rain and strong winds through this time is quite high. I would say the greatest risk at the moment would appear to be in southern, central and eastern counties of England, and maybe later on as we head into a weekend, the strong winds could be causing problems in northeastern parts of Britain. And the reason, of course, is that area of low pressure. It shows up nicely on the Mogreps G ensemble plot for London, showing mean surface level pressure. You can see for the first couple of days there, the runs are nicely packed together. The lines are very closely clustered, which indicates that the runs are all going for something similar. Then we see this big dip, pressure falls sharply, but look at how the runs are spreading out. The lines are diverging, which is just showing that even at this relatively short range, there is uncertainty about exactly what track and how this low pressure will take and how deep it will become. Then there is quite a sharp rise upwards there, higher pressure starting to return towards the end of the week. Therefore, there's uncertainty about wind gust speeds, very nicely highlighted here by the Mogreps G ensemble graph. This is the period in question, and you can see a big spread there. Of course, some of the divergences here will be down to timing, so bringing the low pressure across the southeast a little bit earlier, a few hours earlier or a few hours later, but it's not entirely the reason, because even if you look at these, some are bringing significantly higher wind gusts than others, regardless of the time. So keep up to date with the short range forecasts. And here's a view for Norwich. A big spread there for wind gusts. One or two runs going above 60 miles an hour. A number significantly lower. Rainfall. The 5-day aggregates here from the ECM and GFS models also look quite different. GFS on the right paints a significantly wetter picture over much of England and eastern Scotland. There's rain in all areas on both of these charts, but the totals on the ECM model don't look particularly high away from the southeast and East Anglia. So it is quite an unusual rainfall distribution pattern, and the difference is just really focusing on that uncertainty about how the low pressure will develop. Moving forwards to the 10-day charts, and totals have increased on both, but the GFS is way ahead. The highest values there in Western Scotland, around 150 millimetres, maybe even a little bit higher in places, whereas the ECM model is going for maximums of around 70 millimetres in the Western Isles. Big differences there between the two deterministic models, so when you see that type of thing, it does highlight a degree of uncertainty. Therefore, what do the deterministic models tell us in more general terms as we head towards the end of the first week? Here is the GFS on Tuesday the 28th of October. High pressure starting to nudge up from the south as I mentioned, but it's still quite an unsettled picture with areas of low pressure there close to the north. The Canadian model also has high pressure building up from the southwest. There's colder air still there in the north and the east, but areas of low pressure are moving in as well. The German icon, low pressure close to Scotland. The European model has the high pressure here from the southwest, and that colder air still over the UK, at least over the north and the east. The artificial intelligence version of the same model, low pressure there to the northwest, high pressure to the southwest. And finally, the UK Met Office Global, high pressure there to the southwest and a west or northwesterly flow over the UK, so fairly close to average temperatures, perhaps a little bit below. Differences there between the deterministic models, certainly in terms of the details, just in how much influence high pressure will be having as it tries to build up from the south, the southwest, and what will the influence of areas of low pressure be, which are moving in from the Atlantic, particularly across the northern half of the UK. Difficult to draw too many conclusions. I think what I would say is it's likely to be less windy, so less stormy as we head towards the end of the first week. Temperatures starting to recover, becoming close to the average after that chilly or rather cold spell. A greater risk of rain in the north and the west, therefore a greater chance of dry periods in the south and the east, but not necessarily dry anywhere. All parts of the UK could still be at risk of rain at this time. So how do things develop as we head through the second week? Of course, it's just about the trends and the probabilities at this range, and as I've been discussing, there's actually quite a lot of uncertainty inherent in the forecast very early on in this update. Even after 2 days or so, the details become questionable. So as we go through the second week, it is just about the likely trends. Here's the 16-day GEFS graph for London. Upper air temperatures close to or maybe just a little bit below the norm to begin with, but they're trending upwards. You can see the thick black line, the 30-year average, is below the thick purple line, the ensemble mean, after a couple of days. The upwards trend there is quite clear. Maybe towards the very end, there's something of a cooling trend starting to return. Rain, well, the risk is ongoing, but it's increasing. This would indicate the best chance of dry spells in this part of the UK is early in the week. And the artificial intelligence version of the European ensemble model just supports the GEFS here. The rain risk is increasing as we go through the second week. There are more spikes from around the 1st of November than there are in the days before that. 2-metre temperatures using the data from the GEFS model for London. Daytime maximums across the top, nighttime lows across the bottom. The upwards trend there showing quite clearly. Some orange beginning to return in those columns, 16 to 20, which would be mild or potentially very mild at this time of year as we head into the early part of November. The nighttime lows also increasing. There's some yellow there, 11 to 15s, which also, of course, is mild or very mild for the time of year. With that said, most of the runs through a daytime are going for maximums of between 11 and 15. So probably fluctuating around the average, maybe a little bit above, is the most likely outcome in this part of the UK. Up to Manchester, very similar, but I think there are more rain spikes there than there were on the London graph. So it's a wetter picture here in the northwest of England. And the 2 metre temperatures for Manchester, there isn't a very strong trend here, fairly close to average through the days. There is a little bit of orange, but just a little, so I think those are unlikely to be correct here. The numbers are low, just maybe 1, 2 or 3 runs going into that category. Nighttime, overnight lows, lots of light green there, 6 to 10, a chance of ground frost on some nights and a chance of it being milder at times. But I don't think temperatures here are going to be a big factor through the second week. The picture for Glasgow, upper air temperatures are fluctuating around the average. The general trends are fairly similar, but the anomalies there, the positive anomalies, are a lot smaller than it was on the London chart, so less of a southwesterly influence I would expect. If this is right, a lower chance of a southwesterly influence would probably be a better way of phrasing it. It's a wet or very wet picture as we go through the second week, and as we're this far north, it's probably just worth mentioning the snow row. It reaches a maximum of 2, so snow is unlikely to be falling here through the second week. It's not entirely out of the question, of course, as we head into November. The chances statistically increase, particularly in the northern half of the UK, but at the moment the emphasis is on unsettled weather. It's likely to be a westerly flow which is dominating. The 2 metre temperatures for Glasgow, something of an upwards trend actually. It wasn't particularly visible at the upper air level, but down at the surface, so the temperatures which we actually experience, there is an upwards trend here through the first few days. The amount of yellow increases, 11 to 15. It then dips later on, so turning cooler again if this is right. The nighttime lows, the trends here are not so marked. There could be some ground frost around at times. You would of course expect that at this time of year in the north in quieter spells, but with lots of rain-bearing weather fronts pushing through, it's unlikely that frost will become widespread. In more general terms, here are the rain probability charts for the first 3 days of the second week. So each one of these is showing the chance of 5 or more millimetres of rain falling on a given day for the first 3 days. And it is quite interesting on the first 2 there to see lots of light shading over southern, central and eastern counties of England. I think this is where there's a little bit of difference with the GEFS, the ECM ensembles, given a greater chance of drier conditions in those areas than the GEFS is. But by day 3, the risk of significant rain is increasing more widely. You can see the orange shading spreading into Wales and northwestern England, and the green shading into parts of the southwest. And the interesting thing here, moving forwards to the next 3 days, is that unusually, somewhat unusually at least, the chance of significant rain is quite a lot higher in all parts of the UK. Generally, when you're looking this far ahead, the ensemble spread starts to dilute the picture and it becomes less distinct. But on this occasion, it does suggest that the chance of significant amounts of rain is increasing noticeably through the second half of the second week. So probably in broad terms, tying in quite nicely with that GEFS chart I showed for London, where there was a greater risk of rain later on. The mean surface level pressure data table for York doesn't show very clear trends either. With that said, there are signs of deeper areas of low pressure coming back into play as we head through the second week. You can see the blue shading and the purple shading returning. Those are runs strongly or very strongly low pressure dominated. So once more, there is a signal there for strong winds, the chance of it being stormy in early November, but it is far too far away to say anything about the details. It is just something to keep an eye on, with the amount of purple in those columns starting to increase. Here's the GEFS mean surface level pressure snapshot chart for Friday the 31st of October, so Halloween. If it's correct, well, maybe not too bad in the southern and central areas with that high pressure building from the south. It's maybe preparing to take up its winter residency over continental Europe, just where it often seems to sit these days, but more of an Atlantic influence certainly in the north, more unsettled. And it's a similar story with the European ensemble, that area of high pressure to the southeast of the UK, the Atlantic flow therefore being more active, more vigorous across the north and the west. But it is just worth pointing out that with both of these snapshot charts, they are for the middle part of the second week, and the focus on the more unsettled weather was towards the end of the second week. So perhaps these would suggest that high pressure is gradually declining southeastwards. That would be a little bit speculative. So to summarise, week 1, a stormy spell is possible midweek, particularly in southern Britain, and the reason it's possible rather than definite is because there is still, even at this relatively late stage, differences in the way the computer models are handling the development and track of the area of low pressure concerned. Nonetheless, once it moves away, colder and showery conditions will follow from the north. Showers could turn to sleet or snow over high ground in Scotland, and there is a chance that frost will become a little bit more widespread. And then towards the end of the week, probably somewhat quieter, though rain is still very possible, especially in the north and the west. Week 2, unsettled conditions probably return steadily southeastwards, wettest and windiest in the north and west. Temperatures fluctuating around the average, and as I mentioned, there is a chance of very windy, possibly stormy conditions. Pay in the UK another visit towards the end of the second week, but that's a long, long way off. So there we have it. I think it's a case of all eyes on a Thursday. It may turn out to be a non-event, but there is the potential, at least, for severe weather in parts of the south, the southeast, East Anglia particularly. Well, anyway, I hope you enjoyed this forecast and found it useful. As ever, then, if you did, please consider hitting the like button below and subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already, because in that way you'll not be missing any of my future updates. Don't forget as well to stay up to date with the day-to-day weather developments by checking out the weatheroutlook.com website. Thanks very much now. Bye.